What is going on, everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here with the prize picks preview for round one of the CJ Cup. Actually, an event I'll be at for the first three rounds, so looking forward to sweating out these props in person. But what we're going to do here is break down the golf course, Congaree Golf Club, what to expect from conditions on Thursday, and then wrap it up with three of my top props here for Thursday's round. So without further ado, let's start with this golf course, which is definitely a unique track. If you haven't seen the overhead view, haven't seen Congaree in action, it's all fairway. And then as soon as you get off of the fairway, you're into natural areas, which can be sand, fescue grass, which is right around waist high long. You have a few marsh areas. Pretty much, if you miss the fairway around this track, you're going to be in a whole heap of trouble. So the fairway percentage was 68.3%, which is right around 9.5 fairways per round out of 14. But you got to keep in mind, that's also 5.5 misses. Well, sorry, 4.5 misses right there. 4 or 5, depending on which end of that half point you end up getting there. In either circumstance, it affects the scoring, right? The scores are well over par here, a 71.74 average. So when we take a look at the strokes board, and I know it's a much better field than what we had for this, which was at the Palmetto Championship. So it wasn't the CJ Cup when they played at Congaree last. It was that fact, an additional event last season because of the COVID situation that they added to kind of hold us over until the natural starting place for the season. So we had 3 or 4 events that we had never really seen before that time of year. And this was a golf course that they played as part of that rotunda. And the field wasn't quite as strong as what we had this week, but still, 9.5 fairways hit, over par average, and the green and regulation percentage was also lower than average. It was 65.3%, which is right around 11.7 greens per round. So you're looking at a difficult track, and it's also extremely long. So it has it listed at 7,300 yards. The scorecard yardage is 7,600 yards. So it's a long golf course. It's hard. It's not really hard to hit fairways, but when you don't hit them, you're in a heap of trouble. And then going into greens, it's a lower than average green and regulation percentage. And that is despite the greens being larger than usual. So something I want to point out here is the average width of the fairways, right, is 16 yards wider than average. And the greens here are right around 1,000 square foot larger than what we're used to seeing on tour. Yet the percentages are a lot lower. And you may ask yourself why that would be, right? If they have larger targets, you'd think they'd be hitting more fairways and greens. That's not this golf course. It is a sand-based golf course. It's kind of like a links style if you're familiar with golf courses. If you're not familiar, I'll give you the rundown. They tend to be a lot firmer and harder soil. So when you hit fairways, balls bounce a lot more, which gives you a little bit of extra distance, which is great, but it also opens up a lot more misses, right? When you're bouncing left to right, you're going to miss further left to right, and so on and so forth with the greens. It's easier to hit greens. You're going to have more distance, but unless you're hitting it the perfect weight, a lot of times you're hitting balls that are landing on the green and bouncing off, so on and so forth. And then putting, when you have fast and firm conditions, is also more difficult. So that's why, despite it being seemingly a very easy golf course because you have such large landing areas, that it plays so difficult is because of the soil there. It's a very unique sort of track. So keep that in mind. Like the targets, a lot of the metrics that we typically look at for trying to guess a golf course, like average fairway width, like the size of the greens, that sort of thing, aren't quite as valuable this week because of those factors. From the weather perspective, we're dealing with perfect conditions, so 1 to 2 miles an hour throughout the entire day, which, because it's only going to be right around 60 degrees, is perfect. So me, a spectator tomorrow, is going to have perfect conditions for just walking around. And for the players, a similar type of scenario, right? They're going to be playing like they're in a dome. The ball might not travel as far because it is a little bit cooler in that area. Even for us Southerners, right? 60 degrees is pretty chilly. I mean, even for you guys up north this time of year, right? 40 degrees in the morning, that's a lot colder than we're used to. So that will have an effect on the distance, how long the golf course plays. When it is a little bit cooler, it tends to play a little bit longer because the ball doesn't travel as far. But by the time you get to 10, 11 a.m., that effect is pretty much going to be nullified. So you're looking at pristine conditions, and based on the scoring average we had there for last year's Palmetto, it's going to get a little bit better because of the field strength, because we just have better players in this field, but also the weather. The weather is absolutely ideal. So scoring average, probably going to be closer to, like, let's say half a stroke over par, maybe right around even par. That's what I would expect there for Thursday, and very similar driving accuracy in green and regulation percentages. Now getting into the top props. So we're going to start with birdie or better, and the one fade I want to touch on is what we're going to start with is Jason Day. He's at 4.5 birdies or better, whereas the rest of the board, elite tier players like a Max Homa who's coming in off a win, top 5 for Victor Hovland. You have JT up here who we're going to talk about for an over, right? John Rahm, Rory McIlroy at 4.5 birdies, and then you have Jason Day, the odd man out, the player that is just clearly way outside his pay level when it comes to his skill level. So somebody that I'm taking an under on. He's, long-term, one of the best players we have on tour, but Prize Picks is treating him like his old self. And at this point, he is far from that. In fact, he's a shell of his former self, is dealing with injuries week in and week out. And even when he's healthy, it's not like he's going out there and taking down tournaments. Sure, he'll have a solid round from time to time, but more often than not, he's right around an above average player, right around 0.5 shots gained per round to the field, which is going to get the job done. It'll keep your card on tour, but those sort of players are only going to spike for ceiling performances, let's say like 5 to 10% of the time, like a true ceiling performance, right? Something that doesn't happen all that often. Whereas some of these elite tier players are going to get to 5 birdies, 20, 40, sometimes 50% plus of the time, like some of these guys like a JT, Rory, Rahm, and whatnot. Those are the type of guys you want to take overs on, whereas Jason Day, his inconsistency, that volatility that he brings to the table is why I'm going to the fade. The one over we'll talk about, and there's actually a few of them I like for the over, is Justin Thomas. So he's going off at 10 a.m. It should be warm enough by then. Something to note with Jason Day is he's going off at 9:30, which is when it's going to still be right around 46, 50 degrees. So he's going to have a few holes where he's going to be cold, right? Wearing a little bit of a jacket out there. And if you guys, know anything about a bad back, bad neck, cold weather tends to make it even worse. So that's something to kind of keep an eye on. But JT, it's a little bit later in the day, albeit only like 20, 30 minutes later. But he's got a young body, should be able to warm up a little bit better than a Jason Day. And he's the highest birdie or better percentage player on tour now that Cam Smith is on the Live Tour. So you're looking at the best player at putting up birdie production. With the category that just lets us leverage that, right? It's all about your birdie production. I talked about how off the tee, there's a lot of hazards, and that's why I'm avoiding strokes here. And frankly, I'm probably going to avoid it all week. It's extremely volatile. You hit into one of those fescue patches, a marsh, you hit into even just a sandy area, and you get a rock behind your ball. You could be taking it unplayable, looking at a double, triple bogey right there. And despite making 6 or 7 birdies, you could play yourself out of strokes contention. So if you want to avoid some of that volatility, I think attack birdies are better, right? They should be a little bit more consistent, at least for this golf course and how the board is priced to this point. And for our last prop, we're taking an over on fairways hit, and that's going to be for John Rahm. So if you remember, the average was 9.5. So he's priced right at the field average back there in 2021, and he's an elite level driver. Now he's long off the tee, but he's also accurate off the tee, which is something that I don't think he gets enough credit for from the community. So the fact that he's projecting for well closer to 10.5, 10.7 fairways even on one of the simulations that I ran, just makes him a clear over spot. So I believe he's playing with JT. Yeah, they're playing in the same group there. So it'll make it something I can sweat in person, right? Watch both of those guys, go after JT birdies and John Rahm fairways and have some fun with it. So that's what I'm going with. Just to give you an idea with the rest of the board, the average GIR was 11.7, so it'd be a lot of unders here. Billy Horschel kind of sticks out for an under, but pretty much the whole board, I would lean towards unders there. They bumped a lot of them down, though, so they had these elite guys at 14. They were smashes at that number. They're now at 13.5. Billy Ho was at 13.5. Now he's at 13, so on and so forth. So I'm not going to try and chase that, particularly because it's the first round, right? And I want to see conditions before, we make any huge assumptions for rounds 2 through 4. But I would definitely lean the under there. And then for birdie or better matchups, they've done a pretty good job with it, but there's always going to be matchups that I have my eye on. But as per usual with those, they're on my Patreon, as well as all the other picks that I'm taking, whether it's for birdie or better, for over there for fairways, or for greens and regulation. Every single prop that I'm taking and a write-up for every single one of them is on the Patreon. So make sure to check that out. A link is in the description of the video to that. But until next time, guys, best of luck with all of your prop slips here for Thursday's round. Looking forward to getting to sweat it in person. And hey, if Jason Day's got like 4 birdies coming down to the last hole or two, I'm going to be sweating that in person too. And I'm not going to yell at his backswing or anything, but hey, we'll be using all of the negative juju we can, right, to make sure he doesn't get that 5th birdie. So definitely going to be a lot of fun. Go ahead and let me know in the comments what your favorite prop on the board is. It doesn't have to be one I mentioned, right? If there's a prop out there that you've already gone out there and smashed, would love to hear about it in the comments. And go ahead and smash that like button too before you hop on out of here. Like I said, best of luck, guys. Let's go ahead and get that cash.